I'm Ami Fadia. I cover neuroscience and targeted oncology here at Needham. It's my pleasure to be hosting Pharmamar this morning. I have with me Pascal Besman, who is the CEO of the company. Pascal will take you through an overview of the company, and during the presentation, if anyone wants me to ask a question on their behalf, sorry about that. If anyone wants me to ask a question on their behalf, feel free to send it to me through the chat, and I'll ask on your behalf. With that, Pascal, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Ami, and thank you, Needham, for the invitation to the conference, which is a highlight on our calendar every year. So, to introduce you to Pharmamar, a unique biotech company, we today know that there are certainly a large choice of preclinical biotechs competing for your investment dollars. We, however, have a different menu on offer. It's funny how 24 months ago, we more or less had to apologize for generating revenue, for having cash on hand, and for being profitable, but no more. So we think that we offer quite a few of the things we're hearing from investors are appealing to them in 2022, and I hope I can show you some of these in the next few minutes. We are a global, fully integrated commercial stage biotech, and we develop our drugs in oncology from marine-inspired organisms. We have expeditions all over the world's oceans, bring back samples of marine invertebrates, synthesize them, and turn them into commercial drugs, which we launch using synthetic product. And this has already led to 3 approved drugs. Yondelis, approved in 80 countries of the world, either for sarcoma or ovarian or both. Aplidin, approved in Australia for late-stage myeloma, or Zepzelca, also known as lurbinectedin, approved in the United States and 5 other countries for relapsed small cell lung cancer. We market Yondelis currently and hope to market Zepzelca in the future in Europe with our established oncology sales force that we think is a leverageable asset in terms of business development to layer in other late-stage developmental or commercial assets for that oncology sales force. More on that. Our discovery platform is delivering into our pipeline new drugs, and we're hoping to have 2 more this year. And all of this is leading to our revenues. I mentioned we have those, our EBITDA, our cash. We're listed on the Madrid Stock Exchange with about a $1.4 billion market cap and a robust daily trading volume. So we are happy to say we haven't gotten to where we are today by just hard work or luck. Our platform technology is our creation and our future, and a testimony to everyone at the company. As we look for what we're trying to deliver to shareholders in terms of today and tomorrow, we look at 3 pillars. We're looking at lurbinectedin as something that can be developed in other areas of small cell lung cancer, as well as other geographies, such as EU. We're looking at phase 3 indications of lurbinectedin in other indications. And lastly, other approvals in other countries beyond EU, including Switzerland and the UK. We have a pipeline that's currently got 2 other assets in phase 2s and 1 more starting later this year. And in terms of corporate development, this is the leverage into our sales force I was describing. We are actively looking for in-licensing products to market in the EU, be they late commercial stage or already approved or in registration. And we are profitable with a robust pipeline. And speaking of pipeline, here it is. You can see Yondelis approved, as I mentioned, in these 2 indications. Aplidin in myeloma, Zepzelca already approved. Moving into 2 phase 3 trials that are very important. One in small cell maintenance with atezolizumab, which is a Jazz and Roche trial, and our second-line confirmatory trial called Lagoon, which I'll describe later. Also going in later this year will be a phase 3 in relapsed mesothelioma in combination with a checkpoint inhibitor. And there are ISTs of the combination of lurbinectedin with atezo, which is still ongoing, but formed the basis of that Jazz-Roche trial. Ecubectedin is the next pipeline asset and is currently in one phase 2 and a phase 1 in a solid tumor basket trial and a combination with radiation. So very briefly on the mechanism of action, Zepzelca is an inhibitor of abhorrent activated oncogenic transcription, and by doing this, it's basically stopping the signaling, telling the cell to divide. When you hear about transcription-addicted tumors, you will often find that small cell lung cancer is the poster child, and sarcoma is a close second. So it's no surprise that Zepzelca is a drug that is active in both of these indications. In addition to this transcription inhibition, there is an immunomodulatory effect downstream, as well as an impact on various cytokines, as well as depicted in the cartoon here. So first, let me describe small cell lung cancer to you and where we fit in. We signed a license agreement with Jazz one day before filing with the FDA and received then $200 million up front. We got approved 6 months later in June of 20 and got a $100 million milestone from that approval. And last year we booked a $25 million first commercial milestone, leaving $675 million more in regulatory and commercial milestones. In the first full year, hat tip to Jazz, they did 2021 sales of $246 million, sending us a royalty check of $45 million on a royalty that ranges from high teens to 30% with breakpoints that have not been specified. As I said, Jazz and Roche have initiated a phase 3 in first-line maintenance, which is very important in terms of getting more patients treated for longer. That trial has already started, with data expected in 2025, and is kind of a twin to our Lagoon trial, which will be recruiting in second line and reading out in the same sort of time frame. So small cell lung cancer, this is a very aggressive part of lung cancer, representing about 15%, almost always caused by tobacco use many years ago, long latency period of 30 to 50 years, a very low survival rate at 5 years. Median survival is under 1 year. With limited treatment options, I'll show you in a minute, in both US and Europe, about 30,000 Americans, double that in Europe. Double in Europe because of two things. One, the population is about 50% bigger, and two, there's a larger use of tobacco, especially in Southern Europe. So looking at the treatment paradigm over the last 30-odd years, the first thing you will notice is how many drugs, and they are not exhaustive, but we couldn't fit anymore. Non-small cell seems to get under their Christmas tree almost weekly, a new one. And yet small cell still remains really an oasis progressing at glacial speed. Small cell just isn't like non-small cell. Small cell is where progress proceeds very jerkily. And this begs the question of why. The reason is that in non-small cell we have targetable mutations, targetable either at the receptor or the ligand level. However, in small cell lung cancer, the mutations are almost all on tumor suppressor genes, and therefore it is very difficult to turn off an off switch. RB1, P10, TP53, almost ubiquitously seen in small cell. So let's look at the treatment paradigm today. Frontline is ubiquitously platinum etoposide with atezo or durvalumab on top. Platinum etoposide for 4 and only 4 cycles, followed by the checkpoint inhibitor until progression. Then second line, approved as topotecan only in sensitive patients. Topotecan is a barely efficacious drug that has significant toxicities, such as over 50% of patients needing transfusions, and is burdensome administration requiring trips to the clinic 5 days out of 7, whereas Zepzelca is a 1-hour chair infusion once every 3 weeks. We think that the value proposition that Zepzelca has brought is going to increase and continue to increase the number of people treated in second line, because there were a certain number of patients when proposed with topotecan as the only alternative, either said, you know, I'm good, I'm 96 years old, I've had a good life, and I'm not going to live whatever remaining days God gives me, feeling really destroyed at home, fatigued and ill. I'll just, what will be. And other people tried alternative therapies. Whereas now with Zepzelca's value proposition and a label that scans all patients, a 35% response rate, more than 50% higher than topos, and a much more tolerable profile, we see more patients being brought in to that setting. You can also see at the bottom that the level of competition in small cell is low, and of course that's because it's not been easy and entire asset classes have gone to this place to die. Jazz has reported a 37% market share already last year, only 6 quarters in. They've taken half of topotecan's market share already, the only other approved drug. Topotecan, to put in perspective its value proposition, despite being a monopoly, the day before we got approved had a 20% market share, now about 10. We've pulled other market share from the IO remaining NCCN guidelines that are qualified and no longer applicable. And we are starting to see treatment getting to Zepzelca from the non-platinum chemos that are legacy guidelines of NCCN, as well as platinum retreatment. So we hope that this percent of market share can continue to grow in the next few months. Excuse me. This is the data that got us approved, presented at ASCO 2019, and you can see a 35% response rate. And if you focus on the waterfall plot on the right, we always thought, in looking at this, that the doctors would be most impressed that the dotted vertical line was showing so many patients, probably about 2/3, getting a benefit. But when we showed this to physicians, almost all of them alike were not focused on that as much as the purple bars. The purple bars represent resistant patients. And remember that nothing has been approved for resistant patients before Zepzelca. So a true paradigm shift in the treatment. But the most important part of Zepzelca, perhaps, has been its adverse event profile. And if you look on the top right, where you have what we call paper toxicities of the hematological adverse events, they're not only treatable, but the percentages are quite low. The one that's a little problematic is febrile neutropenia, and the rate there is 5%. And this, in a trial, if you look to the little bottom left, that did not have primary prophylactic GCSF, and you can see its use was only 22%, highlighting the tolerability of the drug. So now, we're not going to be content just with what we've built for the present. Now I'm going to take you on a trip to talk about our imagining our future. This is our Lagoon trial, a 3-arm trial of lurbinectedin monotherapy versus the combination with irinotecan that has generated very compelling earlier phase 2 data versus the physician's choice of oral or intravenous topotecan or irinotecan. This is a 705 patient study with a primary endpoint of overall survival of Arm A versus Arm C, and it is 90% powered to deliver a hazard ratio of 0.8, which I'm sure all of you smart guys and girls can work out is probably a 25% delta, depending obviously on the curve. So this trial is started, and we're expecting to take about 2 years to recruit this, another year to a year and a half to get to data. And we're very excited about the prospects, and the tweaks that we've had in this trial from our prior phase 3 include being much more careful about brain mets, not having mandatory GCSF in the control arm, as well as having a larger number of people with IO prior to this trial, which will benefit us from the synergy that you're going to see in a couple of slides. So now I'm going to show you what is the background and then the actual trial design for the Jazz-Roche trial in maintenance. Presented at last year's SITC meeting was a poster of the combination of lurbinectedin and atezo in 26 second-line patients. And this was a dose-ranging trial, so the first 5 patients did not get full dose, so you would expect the benefit to be even greater. So whereas in monotherapy we got a 35% ORR, here it's close to 60. And whereas you never see a complete response in small cell, more or less in any line, here we have 2 patients. who've gotten that. Our disease control rate of 85% is really not been seen before as well. So an incredibly strong signal with a 5-month PFS that had not yet really reached the median. So this forms the basis for the Jazz and Roche combination trial. And for a long time, there's been talk of the synergy of LERBI and IO. In our mono trial, also we saw some of those patients which showed very compelling data. So now we see Jazz and Roche has embarked on this trial in the fourth quarter of last year. And this is a simple, in the maintenance phase, after platinum etoposide, the standard of care is IO maintenance. So here it will be IO maintenance or IO plus LERBI maintenance with co-primary endpoints of PFS and OS. Same sort of timeline as our trial, same sort of size. This one already up and running. And so we are excited about this, as this trial could get a much broader label in the US, but more importantly, could serve in a registrational capacity in jurisdictions where a randomized trial is required, such as with EMA. So what does this trial do? Well, as you move here from second line, where we're approved, to first line maintenance, first of all, there are clearly more patients. Second of all, the patients tend to be less sick. And third of all, they stay on drug much longer. So very important. Let me show you with perhaps some numbers. I'm going to have you read as if you were reading Hebrew from right to left. So we're approved in second-line monotherapy, where about 70% of frontline diagnosed patients are treated. And the PFS as a proxy for duration of therapy there is about 3.5 months. As we move across to the left, we just showed you our SITC data. That was second line in combination of the PD-L1 and lurbinectedin. And here we think that you've got a PFS of 4.9, maybe 5 months. So already 50% longer duration. And as you move into maintenance, we think that probably 90% of patients of frontline diagnosis are getting treated in that maintenance setting. And so we can easily see, if this trial is successful, a PFS there of maybe 7 or more months. So as it is said, cannibalization of your sales is bad. But if you're going to have our sales in second line cannibalized by frontline maintenance trial, that's a win. More patients, less sick, treated for longer. Let me now describe the last of the phase 3s, this in malignant pleural mesothelioma, MPM, another tumor, thoracic tumor, which is caused by an external stimulus, in this case, asbestos. Very aggressive disease as well, with limited options. Recent approvals of Nivo/Ipi in both US and EU. Even smaller indication than small cell here, with fewer patients. So, all right, just move ahead here. When we look at our data that led to this, was presented at ESMO 2019, and this was a monotherapy, which will not be our phase 3. The monotherapy showed a very compelling PFS of 4 months, overall survival of 11. And so we're in the final stages of planning and starting a phase 3 in combination with an approved checkpoint inhibitor, approved not in this indication, but approved. And we expect to start that in the early second half of this year. And again, the same sort of timeline as the other 2 drugs, same sort of size. So now I mentioned a couple of times leveraging our commercial infrastructure. We think that we have a lot to bring to the table. We've already been on the market for a number of years, over a decade in Europe, and so we have strong KOL connections, strong hospital connections in solid tumors, as well as on the hematology side. We've navigated successfully the EMA, the MHRA in the UK, and Swiss Medic, and continue to have those relationships. We have logistics in place for distribution, and the pleasure of having had to print labels in about 30 different languages, because Switzerland requires 4, Belgium 2, Spain 3. So all of this experience is essential, knowing about pricing and reimbursement, the pricing corridor, and all of these things is something which we've done, and we're engaged as a result of multiple negotiations, which we hope to bring to fruition. We're not a big pharma where a sub $1 billion product can often get lost or orphaned, and we're not an irrelevant small company with limited resources or experience. So we really feel that we're big enough to matter and small enough to care and need to bring the bacon home this year. Our IP on lurbinectidine is strong. It's potentially 2029 with the hatch, which should be delivered in due course. In the EU, it will be orphan, 10 years from our first approval. And in addition, as you would expect, there are life cycle activities taking place to extend those further that we don't discuss. Quickly on our financials, you can see here our recent changes. You can see the impact of the Jazz partnership, and the reason for the drop-off in profits in 21 is the way we account for the upfront payment, which most was booked in 20 and less in 21. We spent some of that money reducing our debt, and we are financing all of our R&D and paying a modest dividend as well. So a very strong position for the company today and going forward. And speaking of going forward, here are the going forward catalysts that we have achieved recently. This year in 2022, not a heavy catalyst year, which seems to be a good thing given the way market is treating catalysts. We expect to have approval from lurbinectidine in other countries continue this year. We would have another update of our phase 2 in combination with irinotecan. We hope to do in-licensing, and we don't put this as a catalyst, but we expect and hope to continue to see Zepzelca grow its share in the United States, where it has really resonated despite a launch during COVID to be the standard of care and something that is now for physicians, patients, and caregivers alike, offering for the first time in a long, long time hope. So as you look at our company and what we're doing today as we go to tomorrow, we are profitable. We have 3 commercialized oncology assets and cash to support our growth, both internally and through in-licensing. We are expecting to expand Zepzelca's footprint in other countries and other indications. And we're bringing new assets into the clinic from our discovery platform, which has already been proven to be successful. We have a really leading European platform for the in-licensing of other assets. And finally, our objectives are ambitious, yet we believe attainable, especially given our past. So with that, I'll conclude now, and I'll take Ami's, no doubt, very piercing and intelligent questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pascal. That was a nice presentation. Perhaps if you could start by talking about the growth potential for Zepzelca as you see it in the US and Europe. In the US, it sort of got off to a great start. It has, as you mentioned, just shy of 40% market share. Why has it not gone up faster given the lack of good alternative treatment options from a safety perspective? And, how do you see that evolve over the next year or two?
Sure. Slide 13, please. So you're right. We've gotten to 37%. I would say tough crowd. I mean, 37% in your first full year. But no, that's a fair question. And the answer is a simple one. Sorry, Pepe. Next slide. Thanks. The reason primarily is to do with the way that the disease is treated. Small cell lung cancer is a disease that is found primarily in the tobacco triangle. And that's a triangle you can draw on the U.S. map from around Richmond, Virginia, to Houston, to the bottom of Florida. And most of these people are from the old tobacco areas, and they are rural rather than urban. And so a lot of them are getting seen by community physicians rather than at big teaching hospitals. And these need to be detailed one by one. which can't be done during COVID. These physicians don't go to virtual ASCO. These people do not go and do CME courses, and these people are not on the list of routine prescribing physicians because they just don't see that much small cell lung cancer. Your typical doctor, for example, who's got a second-line small cell lung cancer patient may not have seen one for 3-4 years. And so the first thing that they do is they go to the NCCN guidelines. And they see here, second line, okay, we've got this topotecan. I know that name, and I've used it, and it's not a great drug. I'm not sure what this Zepzelca is. Oh, look, I've got taxanes here that are recommended, and I've got gemcitabine, I've got irinotecan. I've used all those. Yeah, that's okay. And so there's an education process that needs to be done. But by and large, what we found is once we get to speak to these physicians, they're in. And so now you've reached kind of the tipping point where the physicians are hearing about Zepzelca, and they're saying, wow, you know, this is a new drug, the first new drug in this setting for 24 years. I've got to get in on this. So we can see this market share ourselves. We're not speaking on behalf of Jazz. We can see this market share increase dramatically. And there's one particular area to bear in mind, which is that remaining 20% that are getting IO. IO is in the NCCN guidelines. However, they are not approved, either Pembro or Nivo, anymore in small cell. If you read the NCCN guidelines, they state the only reason to use IO in second-line small cell lung cancer is for an IO-naive patient. That patient in the United States does not exist. And that is going to lead the insurance company, when a doctor says, I want to use Nivo in second-line small cell, to say, sorry, not paying for that. It's not in the guidelines the way you're trying to use it. So hope that answers the question. We think the market share is great so far, and we think it's going higher.
Great. With regards to the confirmatory trial that you are running, can you talk about, or maybe elaborate a little bit on what gives you confidence that that study would be successful?
Yeah, thank you. That's slide 16, I think. Yeah. Sorry, that's the right one. No, you got the right one. Yeah. So we know that lurbinectedin is very active in this disease. It's approved with the first drug approval in 26 years when it got approved, 24 years, beg your pardon. So we have a lot of confidence there. We believe that because there will be 70% of this trial had prior IO, and that we know that IO and topotecan and irinotecan have no synergy, we are convinced that the synergy will be additive to the arm A rather than arm C. That's number one. Number two, when we looked at our prior phase 3, the worst subset were the patients who had CNS mets, brain mets. Hazard ratio about 1.2. Now we know that topotecan has some impact on brain mets. We are not aware that lurbinectedin crosses an intact blood-brain barrier, but we certainly think that topo has got a better deal on that one. And what we're doing in this time is we're scanning the patient twice before entry into the trial to make sure that if they do have brain mets, those brain mets are stable. I mentioned also we're not going to have mandatory GCSF in arm A or C because we don't think that lurbinectedin benefits from it and see that that only helped topotecan be more tolerable. So with all of those reasons factored in and the data that we know from our prior trial, we're convinced that we can get to the number that we need to beat topotecan in that trial.
Thanks, Pascal. Let's talk about the first-line trial, maintenance trial, that Jazz has sort of undertaken along with Roche. Can you talk about the significance of this trial and what this could mean for Pharmamar as well in terms of future growth opportunity?
Well, the significance really cannot be understated. This is an opportunity to move upstream from second line. second-line patients, by virtue of the fact they got to second line, have already gotten platinum etoposide, 2 cytotoxic drugs that make people feel not very good, has their hair fall out, lose their appetite, lose hope. So that's 4 cycles or 12 weeks that they get platinum etoposide with a checkpoint inhibitor. And following that, they enter into this maintenance phase. And this maintenance phase is one that can last many months. It doesn't impact every patient, but the patients that respond really, really well. And they're feeling much better about everything. And when this becomes a positive cycle, where they start seeing their hair is growing back, because lurbinectedin does not have alopecia. But with their hair growing back and a chemo holiday, they feel better. And they go for a walk every night after they ate a steak. And so this glorious circle really benefits. So moving into first-line maintenance is going to see a much healthier patient than one who's ended first-line maintenance. That patient is progressing, is nervous, is edgy, and the doctor is acting in a very rapid way to make sure they're not going to leave any substitutes on the bench. So that first-line maintenance patient is much healthier. They're going to be treated much longer than they are in second line. And those are very important. More patients for longer, but equally importantly is in Europe, we could not file on the monotherapy because there's an approved drug, topotecan. We need a randomized trial. And so this trial will probably serve as the registrational trial first, probably be a little bit ahead of our trial, to get a European approval, as well as other countries that required that randomized trial. So it's important, really cannot be stressed enough.
That's very helpful. Looks like we're running out of time. Perhaps one last question. Can you talk about your business development priorities as we think about the next year or so?
Our business development priorities are to in-license a minimum of 1 asset this year. We're in late-stage negotiations with people or peoples. Of course, we don't control the timing. It takes 2 to agree to get married. What I can say is our conversations with everyone we've engaged have been genuine and robust, and people have acknowledged what we bring to the table, which is different than people who we're competing with. Some are bigger, some are smaller, some are less experienced, some are more experienced. But we know what we have and what we're good at. We're a very small-ish company with a very flat organization. The number of people above the level of business development is 2. So I'm involved in the process. So we're bringing to bear the best assets of the company. And we think that there are assets out there and companies out there where we will be the right marriage partner. Of course, we need to bring the dowry as well. And that's where our robust cash comes in that we can bring to bear on an asset. Now, we're not going after a blockbuster that's going to do $2.5 billion in sale in 2026. That's not for us. We're looking at niche assets where the hands-on approach that we can bring to the table, the detailing, the care, because it's going to be important to us. It'll be 1 of 2 drugs in the bag, and one of the others has been in the market 15 years. So with all that said, we think we're attractive as a partner. It depends what someone else thinks of us to consummate a deal. However, being part of the team doing this, I feel confident.
Fantastic. That was very helpful. Thank you so much, Pascal, for taking the time this morning, and thanks to all our listeners as well for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good day.